All right. This is a recording in progress. So let me see. I have a slideshow and everything. All right. All right. Sure. Let's see. Okay, good. Alternatives to voting. I hope that's what you came for. That's what we're going to talk about. So this is a little story. These people came to me. I do DAO consulting for different groups. I'd love to be doing more of it. Lately, I haven't had any new clients. So if you know people who need DAO specifications, DAO consulting, let them, that's my plug. And they said, we want to do a DAO and we want to have voting on startups, like which startups should get funding, because we're doing like a Moloch DAO type thing. And I said, well, you guys are all experienced people who are experienced investors. If you didn't have a DAO, how would you do this? And they said, well, we would use a decision table. So for those of you who've never seen a decision table, this is Angela's and this is Bart's. And these are the teams of the startups that they're assessing. And they assess them in terms of, oh, I didn't change Bart's scores, but Bart's scores could be completely different numbers. I forgot to change them. But Bart might give totally different numbers than Angela gives. He might think that the team is better or worse or whatever. Sorry, I didn't do the slide properly. But imagine that the numbers are different in each of these tables. And then they weight them and they're like, oh, okay, well, maybe originality isn't as important as market and feasibility and team, or they could change these numbers. And what you usually do is you have everybody on your panel of experts, let's say, fill out a little table like this about the startup. You calculate the numbers, you do the weights, and then you go like, what if we weighted, you can play this, like, oh, what if we weighted market more? Would it change the order? What if we change team more? And then also what might happen is like somebody might say, well, why do you think team two's, team is so crappy? Like I gave them a two, you gave them a four. And then you might have a discussion about it. And then you might come to a conclusion without any voting, right? This exposes some deeper things about why you made those choices. And so I said, so why don't you just do that? You could automate that. That's a DAO. You could make a DAO which uses tables. This is like an automatable thing. You could do it as a smart contract. You could play with the weights. You could do all the things that you do in an automated way. So you would feel that it was autonomous, but without any voting, because that's how you normally do it. Like, why do you want to change the methodology that, and they were older guys too. And they were like, you've been using these same methodologies for 20 years. Before this, you never thought you needed to vote on it. You always used decision tables. Why do you want to change your methodology that's worked for you all these years? And so that's the first thing about how people really make decisions. And so my next question is going to be a question to you. So I'd like you to think of two different situations in your life, two organizations that you belong to that have multiple people in them. One would be an organization that you belong to where it's not for profit. It could be a volunteer organization. Don't choose a DAO, choose something else. But it could be not a community garden like this community garden here. It could be your family. It could be anything, a school board, any group, or just a bunch of friends who, whatever, decide to go out together. So think of one group like that. And then think of a decision that you had to make together. And preferably one that was a little bit divisive, but even any decision you had to make together, even where to go for lunch or in this community garden, what you had to plant. And then for the other one, think of something that is more of a for-profit situation, an organization where you're in a for-profit organization and a decision has to be made either by your team or by the company, not an individual decision, but a group decision. And so you could think about whatever it is, budgeting, features, marketing campaigns, which marketing campaign to run, how to allocate that, right? So I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm going to ask you to share. So what situations did you think about? What types of organizations and how were decisions made? So that's the first interactive part of our session. And you can introduce yourself and something about why you came as you share that thing as well. It's a little less boring of a share. You get to tell what you're really a part of.
I can start since I was the first one here. I'm Irena. I'm based in Berlin. Now I'm actually visiting my family in Czech Republic because I come originally from Czech Republic, and my background is like in the art market. And I came to Web3 around 2021, and this kind of like whirlwind of Web3 got me like more interested in the notions of privacy and organization and governing projects because I took part in several DAOs and was just interested like how this can be then like translated between the democracy as we experience it in kind of like the real life, even though the
Good.
online life
Perfect.
is also real. So yeah, so I'm kind of like deep diving into different topics around tokenomics of projects and governing those projects. And so that's yeah why I'm here this almost Christmas time. And yeah, I think like this the first situation because I'm in different groups of friends and have a large family, so I think that's a situation that comes like very often. And part of it is also that like since like when we like okay let's decide like deciding where to go like for some kind of holiday spot or something to come together for some place. And I think like what is a bit different from when you have some kind of like a public or like kind of like for-profit organization. I think in this like friends and family setting, you already know very well the people that you're dealing with. So you kind of like come in it with the notion that you suggest some options, but you already kind of like know what are the limitations or preferences. So you meet much closer in this kind of like familiar, like in the friends and family setting, than when you start like in some kind of like DAO when there might be like a lot of
Right.
people that you either haven't worked with yet or haven't met yet, or even basically that just joined and you're introduced to them and the first time. So I think that would be kind of like a different the difference in the scenario. But otherwise, I mean, what I experienced was mostly this kind of that you start some kind of discussion and propose some options and then go through like several kind of like feedback loops to distill the end decision or kind of like a end compromise, I would say,
Okay.
than
So, and do you
the
vote?
end decision. Yes, I think it helps. I mean, we do it also with friends, not really with family, with friends, yes. And
Okay.
in the setting, yes, I think like at the end when you like need to choose between two options, we often use actually voting in this
Right.
kind of like, or even like in the kind of like casual setting, because it just kind of like it makes easier to then put the decision in numbers than to kind of keep track of what
Uh-huh.
everyone has said.
Okay. But the two options on the table already, as you said, are based on knowledge of what's likely to pass and be acceptable to everybody. So it's not so competitive. It's much more like the two options on the table that we vote on already have to be acceptable to everybody. There can't be
Yeah.
anything on the table that people would oppose, which is very different from
Or yeah,
from
that's
our current
true.
government, right?
That's true. But it might be also like we had that like the last time that like some option was like unacceptable for someone, just like for different reasons. And they would say, okay, so those are the options for on the table. If this one is voted, I would be out. Like no hard feelings, but it's just like not my jam. And like the rest you vote. So there might be like also some options that are on the table. It might be two, it might be five, some kind of like
Hmm. Cool.
and options that you're deciding about, and that kind of like still could mean like, okay, this is unacceptable, and those are fine for me, and this is my preference.
Cool. All right. Let's hear from somebody else. What types of decision making did they think of? Hopefully a different example. And yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, hi, Amir. Amir?
I'm really sorry. Yes, Amiyar is my name. I'm on the road. I cannot be here for long. I will be listening. Let me just share that I see nothing wrong with voting. I know it has its limitations. It's not a tool for everything, but it's not bad in itself, I suppose. But what I've been learning and experimenting more, which is not voting, and which helps governance and scaling, and I'm trying to apply this to DAOs, is called fractal democracy. Fractal democracy is when groups of 10 people, they get together and they decide, and they elect a representative, and he himself will join other groups of 10 people of elected representatives, and so forth, in a fractal manner. And you can cover millions of population size of millions in a fractal matter with groups of 10 people. So it's just groups of 10, choosing groups of 10 in consequence, and it's a way to scale, which is not possible in other types of. This is called fractal democracy. Yeah, this is what, and also citizen assemblies. I've been conducting, I did once at least, a citizen assembly of sorts, which is not voting, and it's also about governance and decision making. So my two takes is, and I will leave at this because I'm on the road, I cannot be here long. I'll leave at this. It's fractal democracy and citizen assemblies. These are the two tools which are not voting and can be complementary to it.
Awesome. Citizen assemblies is one of the three methodologies that I have in my slideshow as an alternative to voting that is a proven alternative. So I have three proven alternatives and two wild ideas. So perfect. All right, Kansi. Kansi?
Yes, can see. Yes,
Okay.
so my background is from the graphic design world,
Mhm.
and then I came over to Web3 over the metaverse mainly. And yeah, so thinking back, so between friends, it's not voting per se, I would say. It's more like if someone has an idea, then there's some kind of vibe. People react in a certain way, but they don't have to actually say, I want this or I don't like this, but it's kind of more fluid dynamic in this. And for an corporate environment, the thing is, I was I was in a workshop in the beginning of the year, and there was an interesting concept that people tend to create arguments for everything, and this is better because this is this is this. But then you end in a situation where people talk at each other, not with each other. And so at this workshop, it was like, okay, how can we use mainly questioning and trying to understand the other side to get a solution or to get the point, and also in a group scenario, this works. And so, yeah, this is an idea of maybe also which might work
Right.
in this case.
And in corporate environments, do people usually vote?
In corporate environments, it's I think there's like in hierarchy,
Yeah.
and the person who has the highest, yeah, so the highest stage or level has the last say, right?
They have the last say. They're not the only decider, though, right? Like they listen to people, there's deliberation, and voting is very rare. And even within a team where there's less of a hierarchy, it's pretty unusual to vote. So it's interesting, like when we look at our lives, voting isn't always the dominant way of doing things. And that's sort of the first thing to recognize is that this idea of voting, if you think about how often you go and vote, it's usually only in government elections in a formal way. And like you said, like both Irina and Kenzie said, are like you get the vibe and like nobody's going to pass anything unacceptable. And there's other types of contests. Like the other thing about voting to say is there's different types of voting. Like there's ranked voting, like trying to pick the best of several options. Like Irina was like, we put two options on the table. Usually DAO voting is just yes or no. And it's like, well, that's really different than there's two options on the table. It's very different. And it's certainly different than there's three options on the table or five options, which is ranked voting, right? And then there's election of individuals, which is different from ranked voting of proposals. And then there's vetoing, like, oh, like there's all kinds of different types of voting. We don't even, voting itself isn't even one thing. Like some things are like ratification or veto. So even voting isn't exactly one thing. Okay, I might sneeze. So I'm gonna sneeze. That's what I'm gonna do. Okay, now that's finished. All right. So here are some uh okay, great. Different forms of democracy that or different forms that the first one was already mentioned by Amyar, which is citizens' assemblies. And citizens' assemblies, just you can look up all the information about this. It isn't just we get a bunch of people together randomly and we have them talk about a topic. It's a very specific process, which is you define what the problem is or the issue you want to address. You decide what the demographic selection will be. So if you know that there's farmers and fishermen and business people and retired people, you want to make sure like you who you decide as a demographic is random, but it should be relative to the actual issue, right? And so you might say black people, white people, those are demographics, or foreigners, local people are demographics. It really depends. And so that's one of the things about demographic selection. And it's very important. They don't usually say you're here because you represent this demographic. They make sure to do demographic representation, and then they don't tell you you need to represent, if you're whatever, if you're gay, you have to represent all gay people. They just put you in a room. And so it's representing all demographics using sortition, which means random selection. And then the next process is education. So usually they bring people together for a citizens assembly. And the first day of citizens assemblies, welcome, Timed. We're going into a few different we've started already and welcome. Anyway, so citizens assemblies, they educate you on the topic. So they bring a few experts, multiple different opinions, so that you're not you all of the group on the first day or the first 2 days is at least at a basic level in terms of the information they have about that particular topic. They might not agree, they might disagree, whatever, but they at least have the basic information about the topic. Then they have deliberation, and then they present options or proposals. And I wrote ratification. Usually, what happens is citizens' assemblies come up with really great ideas that the government never passes. So, this is a really problematic thing because the people in power don't have to do what the citizens' assemblies ask them to do. You see it more operational in municipalities. But in DAOs, it's the same thing. You could have, if you said, okay, we're going to have this many validators, we're going to have this many token holders, we're going to have this many, whatever, you do random selection, you could have that type of thing and you could fund it and come up with the best solution to whatever problem it is. And it could be automated. You could think of different ways to automate it. So that's one that we know it works. It's an alternative to voting. And you could put certain levels of automation into it so that you would feel that it was a DAO-like structure. I'm sorry for the mess, but I'll put in the chat this link, but you don't need to see all of this mess. But this is about the Internet Engineering Task Force. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Internet Engineering Task Force is in charge of the thousands of protocols that run the internet. Everything from, SSH to TCP/IP to all the stuff like that happens on the internet. Oh, how do we do video packets? How do we do this? All of that has been ruled for 40 or 50 years by the IETF. It is a fully voluntary organization, although many people are sent there by their companies. Anybody can join. Anybody who wants can join. And they have a lot of democratic structures. Like I said, I'll send you this document. And I'll only talk about two of the democratic structures here. So how do they never have voting? They have something called whistling, which was exactly what Kansi was saying. Like they might have some proposals on the table and how you bring proposals again. That's a long story. I won't go into it. There's many, many alternatives to voting that are implemented by the IETF, and I will send you the link to the document it was actually a document that was commissioned by the Ethereum Foundation to look into this because the Ethereum Foundation was like this DAO thing. It's not really working. What is working? This is working. And so proposals on the table, there might be multiple proposals, and instead of voting, they have whistling or humming. They have humming. So who's for proposal A? Who's for proposal B? Who's for proposal C? And that's a starting point to discuss the proposal. And every proposal is discussed in a group, a work group, and anybody can attend the work group. Again, anybody, like anybody. Of course, you have to be technical enough to understand what they're discussing. And one of the things that the IETF says is voting is always gamed, always gamed. And my experience in Web3 has not shown me any contradiction to that truth. Like, it's always gamed, there's always collusion. So Microsoft might send 20 people to vote for something. And that's why they never use voting. Instead, what they have is a chairperson of each area, and the chairperson has to have served 3 years before he got nominated. And I'll talk about nomcom in a second. And that chairperson basically says, okay, it looks like there's most humming for proposal B. Let's start talking about that. What are any of the objections? And they go through it and they discuss all of the objections. And at any point, the chairperson can say, okay, I think we've covered that, and I think we found the best solution. That topic is closed. And so it's not exactly a dictatorship, it's a discussion until it's closed. And this person who's in charge, again, a volunteer position, has the power to do that. Now, it's a very deliberative process, and mostly people have to feel pretty comfortable with it. And like I said, the internet is still running, so it seems to work. Now, how did that person get that position? That's the second area, and that's called nomcom, which is nomination committee, nomcom. And they have a way that you get onto nomcom. Again, there's 10 deciding members. Again, they have a process, which I won't go into, but if you read this document, you'll find out how nomcom people get to be on the nominating committee. Like, there's so many alternatives to voting in this organization that you could just find, dozens. But nomcom, what they do is they have anybody can be nominated who has been at least in 3 of the last 5 meetings. They have meetings every half a year. That's how you get on nomcom. You have to at least have been in 2 years in the IETF, and you can nominate yourself, or people can nominate you, or it could be a random process. But basically, you can nominate yourself for the position. Then what happens is the nominating committee, again, they have to have all these qualifications, at least 3 of the 5 things. They must have been a working group chair, they must have whatever, and then they get randomly put into nomcom, which again, every 2 years they change, and again, volunteers. And then what happens if you run for any of these offices, there is a but private chat area where you can say anything you want about the candidates. And only the nominating committee can see these things. So if I ran, you could be like, Grace is, she's very professional, but man, she just insults people left and right. Like, whatever it is you want to say. And so that all of that negative feedback will come back to the nominating committee. It's not open to the public, only open to the public to write, and only nominating committee gets to see that. And then of the nominees, the nomcom chooses who's going to be the chairperson for all of these. This big mess here is all of the different committees that need to have a chairperson. Like, it doesn't matter what the committees are, but you can see how many different chair people are required here. And that's why there's a nominating committee, and it's every 2 years, right? And so what happens is that every committee is chaired by somebody who has been I'll call it a good citizen for at least 2 years. And if they haven't, there's going to be, reasons why they don't get nominated to that chair. And so again, it's a very democratic process in terms of anybody can participate, anybody can run for an office, anybody can say whatever they want about the people who are running for the offices. And you kind of have to be nice. Like, if you read between the lines in the documents, or you read any of the stuff that the IETF puts out, you understand they have a bit of a sense of humor, and they have a certain level of maturity. Because if anybody's a jerk, they're never going to get on any of these committees. You have to, it's a self-regulating organization. And like I said, I'll send you that document. And then those are my, what do we say? Citizens Assembly, decision tables, and these 2 IETF structures. Those are my 3 structures that are already working today. So I'm just going to stop here for questions, answers, comments, anything we want to say. And I'm going to put the link to this. This is by, sorry, This is I'm just going to put the link here, but it's you can probably find it by search. It's an IETF, and it was commissioned by last year during Protocol Summer by the Ethereum Foundation, and the authors are Kalia Young and Day Waterbury. And I'm saying that just so that anybody listening who doesn't get that link will be able to look up this IETF document. Comments, questions, relevant, not relevant.
Yes, so I have a question about so the nomcom gets all these
Nominations.
whispering
Yeah.
nominations.
And whispering, yeah.
Yeah, and so then there's like the small group who decides the chairs. And inside the small group is no voting, right? So
They decide however they decide that, yeah, they might do ranked voting or figure something out, but how they
yeah.
decide is up to them, yeah.
Yeah, I'm also wondering with collusion and so on, like, but you say the system works.
Look, you've used the
Yeah.
internet, right?
Hmm.
So far, so good.
Yeah, true.
Nobody ever says, boy, whoever's running the internet must really suck. You don't even notice it. Imagine if any of the services you get, education, roads, any of the stuff the government does, you just don't even notice it. It just runs. That's how good the system is, right?
Yeah, true. You also never hear of some, okay, we have now to create this fake for this, and others say, no, it should be this. You never hear of this. It's kind of,
Yep.
it's invisible.
Yep. I mean, there's problems with cookies and you have GDPR and you have a few things, but mostly it's like, I've been using the internet my whole life and it's fine. And there's thousands of protocols. We're not, it's not a simple thing.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of like wondering about, because it's always like one thing, like how those structures work, and then how much you can scale them actually, like until when do they work? But I mean, this seems to work on a very large scale. So
Yep.
because that's often the problem, that like something works up until, like, that it's some kind of like a break point when when it just gets like super messy. But I've never heard about it. I have to admit, I've never heard about it. I have
Nope.
to look into it. It
Oh,
sounds awesome.
Yeah. And a lot of things that just work, you never hear about them. Like that's like, yeah. And it does scale, right? It does scale. It's wild. And they have hundreds of committees because somebody will say, you know what, this protocol around security or whatever, cookies or blah, 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 blah. So this, by the way, is like there's a competing organization called the ITU who wants to take this over, and they're run by all the telecommunications company. And there's some interesting history also in this document about like this dispute. But why the IETF won was because the IETF actually made protocols that worked. And the ITU, which is run by telecommunications companies, was much more interested in private interests. And what worked was this open source model, actually. Rough consensus and working code. They call it rough consensus and working code. You may have heard that. And we come from the open source movement in blockchain. Like this is our legacy, and nobody knows about it. It's fascinating. Yeah. Any other comments? Cool. And you can see that also if you think about like citizens assemblies or some of the other things we've been talking about, and we'll see this in the next like fantastical examples that I'm going to come up with. If you just think like, what if everybody volunteered for whatever they're really interested in and care about, and went to a committee that discussed whatever they were interested and cared about, and figured it out together? And because we all have this like idea about like liquid democracy. So I'm going to have to, if I don't know about education, I'm going to give my vote to somebody else. Or if I don't know about this, I'm going to give my vote. And why? If I don't know about it and I don't have kids in school, like, I'm left out. It's not a problem. And what happens with things like liquid democracy is now I can trade votes. It's like, oh, you really care about women's rights, and I really care about fracking, and I'll trade my vote with you. And that's what you get with liquid democracy. Like almost inevitably, you start getting people trading votes and all kinds of, and you've seen it in the DAOs. You get collusion. I'll vote for yours, you vote for mine. Most of the people who vote in DAOs, by the way, it's I'll vote for yours, you vote for mine. Like, why would I vote in a DAO? Why? I don't have time for that. I can't read these technical proposals. Only if I stand to get money, I'm going to vote for yours, you vote for mine. And so that's really what we get in DAOs is these weird situations. All right. Any other comments before we look at some fantastical things that haven't been developed? But if you're a dev, maybe you'll be like, hey, I could develop that. All right. Cool. So this is what I call Slashdot on steroids. Again, the pictures are not great, but this is Twitter notes, right? They have these community notes now to try and figure out is something real or not. Now, community notes is weird in my eyes because just because the majority of people believe something doesn't make it true. Like if the majority of the people believe, like for example, healthy at any weight, that's like one of those popular ones, healthy at any weight, don't fat shame, healthy at any weight. It doesn't make it true. It makes it politically correct. Like it's actually true that if you have overweightness, you have more risk for certain diseases. And no matter how popular it becomes to say we shouldn't fat shame and, we should healthy at any weight, it won't be true. So popularity doesn't mean truth. But community notes is one way of thinking about that. And Slashdot had a more extreme moderation idea. So this is probably the first really Web 2 thing. It's a little bit of an old thing, but basically what they did was it was a news site and there you can see it's like that has these comments down here. And every so often, if you were a member in good standing, you would get moderation points. So it would be your week to moderate. You'd get like 2 weeks a year or something. And when you moderated the comments, it wasn't thumbs up, thumbs down. You got something like 7 or 8 different categories. You could say insightful, you could say funny, you could say redundant, you could say flame bait. You could say whatever you wanted. Like there were 7 different or 8 different categories. And then when you viewed the website, the comments that floated to the top were the ones you could also put a filter on, like don't show me any comments that have fewer than 3 stars, or show me only the humorous comments. And that it was a really brilliant thing. So that's very different from thumbs up. Controversial, you could say it was controversial. So there might be a very insightful comment that's also controversial and that I disagree with, but it still has 5 stars. Like thumbs down means I disagree, but I could still say it's insightful. Now, why do I consider this an alternative to voting? Imagine if you had to elect experts on a particular topic. And so, first of all, if everybody on the platform gets 2 weeks in moderation, you've got a lot of crowd knowledge and wisdom. And if you run a large language model over this thing and you say, listen, we need 10 committee members for the committee on plumbing and sewage for the city. And you run an LLM on this, you would get a list of the top 100 people who have insightful comments. You'd be like, we need to have on the committee of 10 at least 2 people who are frequently controversial, but also highly rated as experts. And so it would be like every time you had moderation, you are actually voting with your moderation points on who is insightful, on who is intelligent, on who knows about something. And you could run a large language model on this in order to, I'm going to call it elect. Instead of voting, it's a kind of election that is just as democratic, probably more democratic than voting. And it's easy to imagine how this might work on any social media platform. And so this is a kind of one of the things you could do with this. Another thing you could do with large language models, and is sort of done with Polis, is you could run your large language models over this topic of whatever it is, sewage and sanitation for the city, and come up with clouds of problems like, oh, look, this thing is being talked about a lot. or clouds, word clouds or language clouds of here are some areas or directions for solution. These people think we should use more money and fix this area. These people think that we need to use a different type of sanitation system that's more ecological. And you could start to group these ideas together and actually start to create proposals and that are based on these large language models that start as your initial proposal. And you could have group people together according to those things. You could have the groups compromise with each other. So you could actually use large language models to really understand what do your people want and what are some of the directions. It has to be modified a little. I'm going to give you another one, another link in here, but that isn't this, but it's something else. And it's called 4B. And the idea behind that is people can put in proposal and then on each section of the proposal, each paragraph, or even each sentence, you can make a comment, and then you can thumbs up, thumbs down that comment so that the proposal can be ongoingly modified by the people. So you could imagine like an LLM coming up with the initial proposal and then using something like 4B to modify the proposal until you get something that's close to ratification. Or, as you said, it could be you come up with the three top proposals, like one of them is about using more ecological, one of them is using more budget, whatever, and then people do ranked voting on those three proposals. So this is a completely different approach to how we're doing proposal making today, and it's very democratic. And you could say something like, all of the proposals would be acceptable to the people if they pass, because of the process. Anyway, that's just a wild idea that hasn't been developed. Although I have heard Dr. Nick Almond from Factory DAO talking about something like this. I don't know how close they are to developing it, but I know that there are people who are working on this. And there was recently an article out from Joe Edelman and his team about teaching AI to be wise. Super interesting. I can also reference that if you guys are interested. This one, I did not finish the slide. But this is called radical co-funding, and I'll send you the document. I completely invented this. And the idea, I'm going to stop showing the screen because I didn't finish that. I'm not going to show you that. I'll show you the actual radical co-funding. So basically the idea is like this, like what if I were a DAO and I said, look, here's the problem I have, whatever it is, not enough users, not enough block space, whatever I decide that I propose as the problem. Or I just take a bunch of people who, I don't know, want to solve problems in my DAO, and I put them together and I have them type in what problem do you want to solve? And then I can group them all together again using large language modules or something like that. Here are the three groups. These people want to solve problem A, these want to solve problem B, these want to solve problem C. And I say, okay, each group has $10,000, euros, whatever tokens, and 1 month. At the end of the month, you must come up with a proposal. You must tell us what you did with the money, and you must have the team for implementing the proposal. And so at the end of a month, you would get a proposal. Maybe you'd get the top three proposals. You'd get a team that works together because anybody who doesn't have a collaborative spirit is going to leave that. They're going to hate that system. And you've got a bunch of people who know and trust each other because it's like, oh, yeah, I know we worked together for a month. And you're going to have a governance model because they had to decide what to do with the money. Like, and so now if you're doing a problem that is $100,000 problem or $1 million problem, you just spent $10,000 and none of it went to waste because at the end you got the proposal that this group came together and decided was the important proposal. And even if you think about that, you might not even need to have a well-formed idea about what the problem is. Just like, oh, something, something environment. But by the end of that month, the group will have had to have defined the problem better too. So anyway, I'll show you that document as well, which I completely made up. And I was talking about larger budgets because of the particular people who I was talking to at the time, who I was consulting with at the time. But you can imagine this is a much more efficient way of running your DAO. It's like, let's take some people, and you could give them a multi-sig and you say, listen, this is your $10,000, but you've got to have at least 7 people in your group vote on this in order to release any of the funds. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I told you I would write you is 4B. 4B.io you can also look at, which is it's a beta at this point, but the idea is creating proposals together as a group. And the problems with some of these things in DAOs, as you know, is people don't get paid to participate in these processes, which is what the radical co-funding does. It says like, look, you've got 10,000 bucks. You can at least pay some real experts or, get people involved or reward people in a reasonable way. So they're not just volunteering. I mean, to me, that's one of the biggest problems with DAOs today is like people are expected to do a lot of work for free. And somebody like me, I can't, like I can't. So the best people, like the top consultants, the top DAO people, they're not going to volunteer for very long for your ecosystem. And there is going to be cross-pollination. So I know there's people like Daniel Ospina, who's really active in the Arbitrum DAO, and Griff Green, who's really active in Optimism. These two people, if they would cross-pollinate, would be great. But you can't. You have to spend all your time at that one DAO because it's about campaigning. And so somebody like Daniel, who would be really useful if he would like spend some time in each DAO, there's no budget for that, for like, hey, let's pay Daniel, 5 grand for, consulting for us or me or whatever, like somebody like me, it's like there's no place because I'm not good at campaigning and I don't want to spend any of my time kissing people's tushy. I just don't, like I really want to spend my time consulting for DAOs and I'm not good at politics and I don't want to spend any time on it. And so this is a real disadvantage of the way that DAOs are designed today, is that they're not really good at bringing in the top experts in a particular topic. And that topic might be DAOs, but that topic might also be marketing. That topic might also be, it's not usually dev, but it is dev. Like only the devs in your ecosystem are the devs that could get a dev contract, even though there might be some specialized thing that you really need to bring in, whatever it is, Zug or somebody, and you can't because that's not how it works. So anyway, comments, questions, insights, disputes.
I need to read through the documents and then come back to you with comments and disputes. It's difficult to dispute it at this point, but it's a really difficult, really interesting thoughts. And I love this tool about the proposals, like the comments of the proposals, because I think, like as you say, I mean, like the time that basically DAOs kind of like require from you so that you could actually actively participate somehow like regularly. It's impossible because you would need to actually read the whole proposals. You have to have knowledge strong enough to be able to decide on the proposals. And also, what is the problem? Now that you read the proposal, you spend time already thinking about it as you read it, and then you come to the end, and then you see the comment section, and there you kind of like have to jump back, and you're like, okay, so this doesn't. Someone is saying that the person is actually not able to perform. Okay, so I have to. So this kind of, if that would be already in the section when you read it. It's just about like optimize it so that you would like achieve the most and like be able to get across as much information as you need in the smallest time, because people have lives actually, right? I mean, people don't have time to work and then to participate in DAOs just for fun. That's why the voter apathy comes, and it's incredibly time consuming.
Yeah.
So like,
and it's not fun,
and it's not fun. It's
right?
not
But being in a
it's
conversation is fun. Like coming to a meeting or a
yeah.
citizens assembly is fun.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and being kind of hurt, or so there are still, I mean, there are reasons why people still participate, right? And I think there's a lot of people who also kind of like want to explore it and experiment with it and want to kind of like see, okay, there's this, like voting in the democracy that we do like once every few years, and we see that it's not actually working that well. And so I mean, we see kind of shit show is it bringing us right now, right? So we kind of like have to experiment with different forms how to organize ourselves. And I think also, I mean, I think delegation is also interesting. Interesting in the structures where you're kind of like, okay, I don't have that much time for it, but this person actually knows what they're talking about. So when it comes to this, they can actually decide for me. And that's like, as you were mentioning, this kind of like you can choose on based on like the insightful and the knowledgeable comments or content that you're able to spot, right? I mean, we all, when we take enough time bruising through some discussion forums, you're able to spot the people who are kind of like, okay, they seem to know.
Yeah.
So that helps.
So yeah. Well, so like the way that I was showing it was that you would never have to choose them. You would just do it as you
Yeah.
read the insights. So I want to tell a delegation story. I just have to tell this
Mhm.
story. I don't
Please,
know
yes.
why. I was starting to get involved in something, and a friend of mine who I really like and wanted to support was doing some proposal in one of the L2s that has delegates. And I don't know, by randomness, I just saw there was a meeting going on about this proposal, and I went to the meeting. And this individual had gone to ECC, talked specifically to the delegates, who all kind of said to him, "Oh, it sounds like a good idea," and then proceeded to vote against the thing. And he was in this meeting, and there were a couple of delegates, mostly not delegates, but like mostly like staff. And then I was just this weird, like randomly came to this meeting. And he said, like, listen, I went around, I spent a lot of my time and a lot of my money to do this proposal. I'm an expert. I've been in the community, blah, 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 years. People said to my face that they thought it was a good idea and then voted against it. Can you tell me what's going on? And this delegate started to speak, and it was like watching a politician on TV. Like the blah blah blah, you know how they talk, and well, one
Yeah.
could consider that in this, and it was like, wow. As soon as you elect a politician class, they start acting like politicians. And you're
Yeah.
never going to get brilliant ideas out of them. They're going to only vote for something that's safe for them to keep their position as delegates. It was shocking. I like couldn't believe it.
Mm.
It was just that guy had been a delegate for a month and he was talking like a
Yeah.
professional politician. It was just
But was it like a elected function in okay. What I mean is more like in an open gov, like in the Polkadot governing format where you basically like can allocate your tokens to someone to vote
same,
for you, but it's not
same. It's an elected position.
easy.
Why would that be any
Yeah.
different? If you start voting for things that are slightly controversial, a little bit cutting edge, maybe risky, people will restake their tokens.
Yeah, but you can, yeah. Mm.
Same. It's an elected position like any other elected position.
Mm.
You have to talk nice and have people stake their tokens on you because you're the coolest, whatever, and you say things that are appeasing and sound smart. And you can sound smart without being smart. You know,
Mm.
that's the problem with elected positions, which, like, the thing that I was showing you with the slash dot, it's really hard to sound smart and not be smart in that case because you don't know who's going to be moderating every week, right? It's random who gets to be the moderators. And nobody knows that you're a moderator. And you're just saying the truth at that moment about that one comment. And if you say a lot of things over time, it'll be clear that you're an expert or just an idiot because so many different people have moderated. It's very different from, oh, I'm campaigning, and people will call you on your BS in a discussion forum in a different way than they will when it's time to vote or stake. And the other thing about that, which is really interesting, this was about like it was called, what is it, like holographic voting or whatever. They used to have, and the first DAO is the Genesis DAO from DAO Stack. It wasn't the DAO, but like the next one was called Genesis from DAO Stack. And they had this thing where a holographic consensus or something where you would also stake on whether you thought proposals would pass or not. And so that if you thought a proposal would pass, it would float up to the top of the proposal. So that there wouldn't be voter fatigue. You'd only vote for the ones at the top of the queue. It was like, very initial DAO. It was very, very early. And what happened was like you would vote, like just because you think something is passing doesn't mean you think it's a good proposal. And it might be that person is popular and that person knows a lot of people and that person is nice. And so you would go to like it didn't change the fact that people were voting for things that like that it prioritized things that were more popular, not necessarily things that were smarter. And that's always the problem with those types of systems. It's about popularity and campaigning and collusion, and it's almost never about merit. Because especially, I mean, I guess it also depends what you're thinking about. Like to me, DAOs are supposed to be something that is experimenting with really interesting stuff. Like we printed our own money. We're not like governments. We're not playing with people's lives and armies and food distribution. We could try wild experiments, but we don't because we're migrating towards the mean, towards the like revolutionary ideas don't pass in votes.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And it creates divisiveness, which is the biggest problem. Like, I don't need to tell anybody in a democracy today that it creates divisiveness. Like,
Yeah, so like your way to go would be like participate, but without voting, participate in other forms, because as soon as voting is included, you kind of like get,
it's a game.
yeah.
It's a game. It will be gamed. Yeah.
Mm.
Kanzi, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was wondering with if you have, for example, some ideas of governance that are a little bit more on the crazy side, and then maybe it creates divisiveness in this case, but then you have maybe two DAOs that do something. And will this even be better? Because then you have two experiments running at the same time instead of one that is kind of wishy-washy in the middle.
Yep. When you read the radical co-funding, I actually, like I said, after that round, I was talking about 75,000, not 10,000. I said every group has to come up with a budget, a proposal, a team, and an alternative proposal that like for some reason didn't pass. Maybe it was some brilliant guy that nobody got along with him. Maybe it was just like that might work. It's a little bit crazy. Like that every team had to come up with both like the consensus proposal and a second place, but not the second place proposal, like something that was like a little bit out there, like or for whatever reason would never be a consensus, but they think is worth trying. So that was actually in there as one of the like things that you have to present at the end with your $10,000. The problem with radical proposals is that people who are radical aren't popular. Sometimes they're on the spectrum, like there's some weird genius working they're spending a lot of time thinking about this instead of a lot of time campaigning. And they're saying something outrageous and it's really hard. And a lot of those things end up mistakes. Like, do you know how they reduced drunk driving in LA by 75%? Uber, completely unintentional, But if you're a girl going out for a drink and you like got to try and hail a taxi in LA, 75% reduction in drunk driving. And so a lot of those things happen by mistake, and a lot of those things, like it's very hard. But the radical idea is like I call mine radical co-funding, which I think is pretty far out there. And nobody's interested. whatever. Some of the L2s are like, oh, show me that thing. And what it doesn't look like democracy to them. There's no voting. But it definitely it optimizes for collaboration.
Even though it brings results, it does not look like it. Yeah.
Yeah. But they don't think about, well, what if they come up with no proposal? And it's like, how many tens of thousands of dollars have you allocated to things that didn't turn out good, or duplicate efforts, or whatever? People who are lone wolves and couldn't work well with the rest of the team, or it also depends on what you're optimizing for. Like, what decisions are you making? How would you normally make them in the real world? What parts of that could you automate? What parts of this do you want to automate? And what's more important, like, we keep talking about cooperation in DAOs, but we've designed them as zero-sum games. I mean, you know what I mean about everybody in the DAO being nice to each other, but actually competing for the same pond of funds? Like, what level of emotional, like, maturity do you need to have to really vote your own proposal down because somebody else's is better? To not, if your voting is transparent, like I remember when I was in the Genesis DAO, it was really like there were people who I really thought they had stupid proposals, but I wouldn't vote against them. I would have to pretend that I didn't see the vote and just abstain. But I didn't want to vote against them.
Yeah, and if I think like about how many times did I just kind of like I wanted to vote, but I was, like I decided just kind of like, oh, this looks okay. Didn't, like do any, and sometimes it was like quite a lot of funds that were in the game. Not that like my vote would like sway back and forth, but I don't really have any too optimistic ideas about how many people who vote actually do the research. And it's not, I mean, it's
Yeah.
not possible. It's just so just show up, cast a vote if I feel like it, and go and forget about it, right? And like not many times I even like checked back, okay, like like in half a year, did this actually happen? Like what was the outcome of this thing that I kind of like helped pass?
Yeah.
So it's yeah, at the end it's just numbers, and so I think like there's like a lot that can be learned also. And I think like because also like in the beginning of the DAOs, it was just because I mean it's like the whole organizational design, it's a crazy difficult thing, and you
Yep.
can't expect that just kind of like a new tech will solve this, because it's not
Yeah.
solved by blockchain. It's just how people organize. Okay, now like what blockchain does, or kind of like what the whole tech like brought into it, that we can be like dispersed all over the world, but we still need to organize in the same way and still need to reach decisions and choose people who will do stuff for us and so on. So it doesn't really change like whether it's a cooperative somewhere or whether it's a large DAO. And there are hundreds of years of experiences in how people organize to get stuff done. So there's much more to learn than just getting out the tech and hoping that it will just like solve all of the problems that people haven't been able to solve yet in real life in how many years.
Yeah. And so many of the problems are really technical, like the IETF. Like, who wants to be on that committee? It's like, if you want to be on that committee, be on that committee. Don't ask us to vote on what you do. Just like you 20 geeks who understand what that proposal says.
Have fun.
Yeah, like that's most of the DAO proposals are really like the way the IETF decides. It's like whoever's interested, get in the room, and whoever doesn't care, which is most people, you know. Like if you think about all these L2 changes and upgrades, which is what we're voting on, I don't know about them. I use those L2s, right? Like I use Optimism, I use
Yeah.
Arbitrum, I use Gnosis. I don't care. It seems like it works exactly the same now as it did when I started using Arbitrum and Optimism. I see zero difference as a user. Like just because I hold an Optimism token,
Yeah.
cool. Well, thanks so much for coming to our session. I will post it somewhere. I don't know where I'll post it. I'll post it somewhere. And
Please.
yeah, stop recording. Thank you.
Thank